And as I stepped into the situation, it quickly turned into these people bullying and verbally abusing me for a couple years straight. That was the moment that I was like, wow, if God loves me when I don't love myself and I don't feel like anyone on earth really loves me, then what more in life do I need? Me and my sister went by ourselves to Cambodia when I was 14 and she was 16. We flew halfway around the world by ourselves. And I clearly heard him say, when you said that you would do anything for me, did it include this? So I ended up going back to him and being like, hey, so I would like you to pray about getting married.
Oh, you said that to him?
I did, where he got the diagnosis of early-onset Alzheimer's, which is extremely rare. He was around 52 when he started showing symptoms. Having to watch a parent that is young in their 50s lose their mind is horrible. Yeah, my dad died at 60, and it was one day short of my 6-month wedding anniversary.
Well, welcome back to Celebration Church Podcast. And you might be going, something looks different. Well, that's because normally Hannah Taylor is the interviewer and someone else is on the receiving end, but today we're doing it in the opposite direction. That is, Hannah is going to be the interviewee. We're going to learn about her life and her journey and what the Lord's done in her in many different ways over the years. So, Hannah, thank you for being here for your podcast.
I have to say, it feels really weird in the seat. The mic's on the wrong side. I'm nervous. Like, you messaged me, I guess it was last week. You're like, I want to do a podcast where I interview you. And I'm like, is this how everyone feels when I message them? I was like instantly like nervous. I'm like, also it was the pastor messaging me. So I'm like, is this an interrogation? Can I get fired because of this? I don't know, but.
Well, it's probably not going to be that bad. But we do want to learn about your journey. Of course, I've known your family for a long, long time. I don't know how long you were a part of Celebration, but I'm guessing close to 20 years.
Yes, I think we're at 21 years.
Yeah.
So,
and
hot minute.
Of course, I've known your parents, and we'll talk about your journey. But let's start with you and your family. Just tell us about your family, how many members of the family you have, and so forth.
Yeah, so I am one of 7, but a notable thing about my family is 3 of my siblings are adopted from Ethiopia. So when I was like 12 or 13, my family adopted my 3 younger siblings from Ethiopia, and they are a sibling set. So yeah, there's 7 of us, and I was born here, and I was born in Johnson City, and when I was 5, made the big move to Gray, and then I really moved far away when I got my house and moved to Kingsport. So
you've lived locally, but you've traveled a lot around the world, so you're sort of global in that respect.
Yes, traveling is one of my hobbies, would be putting it lightly, might be an addiction, obsession, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I've been to 23 different countries. Wow. And plan to keep racking those up. But have had the real privilege of being able to also live as a missionary in Cambodia for summer. I've been there 3 times total, but live there for a summer serving, and then also living for a semester in the Middle East, which was also awesome.
Well, let's go back to when you were young. Now, did you homeschool all the way through school?
Yes, I was homeschooled all the way through, and that was very much a godsend. I don't know how I would have done in public school. I also found out when I was an adult that I'm dyslexic, so I did not like school at all. So, yeah, homeschooled all the way.
And was that a good experience for you would say, overall?
Yes, definitely for me it was. I had a lot of issues making friends, and so I built up a lot of rejection early on in life, and it would have been really difficult for me to be in a setting where there would have been cliques all the time, or just being around other people daily where, there was a lot more opportunity for that. So I don't want to know what it would have been like for me if I had gone to public school. I know, I'm not one of those people that think that every single kid should be homeschooled, but I think for me, it was definitely a godsend that I was homeschooled.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not for everybody, but like our kids homeschooled, and they would, I think, consider that a good experience, but it wouldn't work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before your family adopted your siblings that came from Ethiopia, what are you in the birth order?
I am the third oldest.
Third. And so what was your relationship like with your parents, with your siblings before the adoption?
So prior to the adoption, I had a really great relationship with my mom and my sister, and I guess I had an okay relationship with my brothers, as sisters sometimes do with brothers. They're boys, so it was a little bit different. My dad, he was a workaholic for the first chunk of my life, so I'd have very few memories of him prior to being, I guess I was around 10 when he started working from home, and I have more memories of him after that point. But I have few memories with him because not only was he a workaholic, he also had extremely severe allergies to where he could not go outside. And a lot of my childhood I spent outside back in the day before cell phones and media were a huge thing. We spent a lot of time outside. So I actually didn't have much of a relationship with my dad. And that thankfully healed and strengthened later on in my life, but he was just more of an authority figure prior to that.
Now, if I remember correctly, your parents met in college, didn't they, at Milligan?
Yes. So my dad was at Milligan and my mom was at ETSU, but my dad was in the ROTC program at Milligan. Well, I guess connected to ETSU where my mom's brother, my uncle, was. So my dad was friends with my mom's brother, and my uncle heard that there's some guys that weren't that great that were interested in my mom or were wanting to try to date my mom. And he's like, I need to put an end to this, so I'm just going to get my friend, who I do like, to date her instead. So he set them up.
And it worked.
It worked, thankfully, or else I wouldn't be here.
Now, both your parents knew the Lord, though, even when you were a very young child. Is that right?
Yes. So my mom grew up in a very Christian family, and I forget when in her life, but it might have been when she was a young adult or late teen. I think it might have been after she moved out. My grandfather actually became an Assemblies of God pastor and still is to this day, and he will be until he breathes his last breath. But he is, so she grew up in a very Christian family, and they would like travel around doing Christian music, and like every weekend they would actually tour around. They had a little tour bus, and they were called the Singing Crasses, because Crass was my mom's maiden name. And they would go around every weekend and doing that. My dad, he technically grew up loosely Catholic. And then he went to Milligan, and because his best friend had gone there, and he kind of tried to fake being a Christian a little bit. But then he was at Milligan, you're required to do some Bible classes, and he was in a class with Dr. Magnus, and he just started to ask a lot of questions and ask God to reveal to him if he was true, like if he was real. And his friend was a Christian, and he was out hiking with his friend. And they were doing some rock climbing, like kind of like not official rock climbing, but climbing on cliffs. And his friend ended up falling down 30 feet, almost rolled off, but was stopped by a bush over another ledge where there was another like 60 feet. And he walked away with no scratches. And my dad was like, okay. Like, he was definitely like, okay, maybe God is real, because my best friend should have just died doing something that I was pushing him to do that he didn't want to do. And then on the way home, he was almost in a car wreck or something. And after that, he accepted Christ and became a Christian and was baptized by the professor at Milligan, and he ended up actually marrying my parents. But so he became a Christian shortly before meeting my mom.
So you grew up in a home where both your parents were Christians. Doesn't mean they were perfect parents. You've already said your dad was probably too much of a workaholic, things of that nature. But at least you had that environment, and they tried to impart to you a Christian worldview. When did you first, let's say, have a inkling toward knowing God, walking with Him, and then maybe later you developed more of a personal relationship? Explain that to us.
Yeah, so I prayed the prayer when I was around 4 years old in a parking lot in Willow Springs Park in Johnson City. My family lived really close to there at the time, and I really do think I meant it. I guess there's never really been a moment in my life I've questioned if God is real or not. I think definitely it was like my parents' faith at the beginning for sure. I was just believing what they were telling me, but I think it became real to me early on. It wasn't like I ever like strayed away and then like, oh, God is real. So I do think it was real when I was 4. But I think I was active about trying to have her like be a good Christian and like read the Bible and pray. And like, I guess I started reading the Bible daily, like around 7 or 8, and like remember trying to have that be an active part of my life. I think though, when it really became real for me, or it became deep in like a really personal relationship instead of more of a religious to-do list, is I went through a season of my life where I was kind of felt purposeless, was trying to figure out like what's God doing in my life. And I was like a teen at the time, and I was put in the situation where I was going to be around this group of people on a consistent basis for a good chunk of time. And I thought that maybe this was God calling me to minister to these people and to like help them in some way. And I was really excited and expectant about that. And as I stepped into the situation, it quickly turned into these people bullying and verbally abusing me for a couple years straight. And they would tell me things like that they thought I was so ugly and that they didn't like me or want to be around me because I was ugly, and that there was other people in the group that they thought were better looking than me, so they wanted to just be with that person, be around that person. And they really just wished they told me that they wished that I would just die and burn in hell, and how happy they would be if I had never been born. And it was consistently this on a regular basis. And it was the same time there was a lot of stuff going on in my family at home. So I just felt really, really alone, and like there was no one there. So I'd seen, I forget, I think there was like some movie that had come out called Letters to God. And like the idea of writing letters to God. So I just started like, not necessarily like writing letters, but I got a journal and I started just writing to God and just expressing to him, because I realized the deepest cry of my heart at that time, and I think it's just in my DNA. Maybe it's in everyone's DNA, but to some extent, I think it's in everyone's DNA. My deepest cry is I just wanted to be loved. And in that time of my life, I didn't feel like anyone on the planet loved me. And I just wanted to be loved. Obviously, I know people loved me, but, you know, teenage, emotional, going through puberty brain, I just didn't feel like anyone loved me. And I was trying to get these people, even though they were bullying me, I kept trying to get them to love me. I just wanted so desperately to be loved. I kept trying to be on their good side, and it just wasn't happening. And I will say at that time, although I was a Christian, I was a little bit of a jerk and not the nicest person. I'm not saying I totally deserved it, but I see from their perspective why they did what they did to me, and these people were going through tremendously difficult situations and seasons of their life as well. I cannot imagine what they were experiencing. So the phrase "hurt people" was definitely true in this scenario. But after a few years of this going on, I started having a lot of, definitely there's a lot of self-hatred, and I just was totally destroyed and torn apart. And I just remember praying to God, I'm like, hey, I'm broken into so many pieces, and I don't know if you can put me back together again. Like, I just felt completely broken. And there was one day, one of these people said something really mean to me, and I just remember running and hiding behind a car and looking in the mirror of the car and just looking at myself in the mirror. And I said, God, this is what these people think about me. What about you? What do you think about me? And later on, a couple hours later, I was riding in the car, and I had headphones in, and I was listening to music. And I was totally like zoned out, and not like the music was playing. I wasn't hearing it though. I was just zoned out. And all of a sudden, I just heard the lyrics of the song said, "You're amazing." And that's all I heard. And I knew in that moment that God was telling me that he thought that I was amazing. Like, I just knew in my knower that that's what God was telling me. And that, I think, for me, that was the moment, that was the point of no return. that was the moment that I was like, wow, if God loves me when I don't love myself and I don't feel like anyone on earth really loves me, then what more in life do I need? And I guess that was the point that I was all in.
And about how old were you at that point?
I think I was around 14 years old. And I just sold out at that point.
Now, I think a lot of the struggles you talked about are very common for people in the young teen years, that everybody wants to be loved and accepted, as you said. But we tend to think that we're going to find that from other people. And there can be great people, loving people, but no human being can fully satisfy that yearning to be loved. It has to be God himself who fills that desire, that need. And unfortunately, in our culture today, so many people in those young teen years are searching for love and listening to the lies of the culture, and oftentimes falling prey to some deception to try to find hope and love. Fortunately, in your case, you really sought and turned to the Lord at that point. Did you start to really develop a personal relationship with Christ then?
Yes, absolutely. That was definitely, I guess it was probably in the midst of that season, that the writing led, like the journal of where I would write to God. And I guess in that season also, I just really started feeling the need to have a father. And with my dad being a workaholic, and like I said, years later, he did really radically change in a really good, beautiful way. But in that season, I really felt like I did need a father. So in that season for me, Father God became Daddy God. And like I've really developed that relationship. And that's also in the same season I started practicing and learning and growing in how to hear the voice of God. So it became not only me writing to God, but he would write back. And I would just sit down with a journal and I would just feel like God would just speak truth to me and tell me what he thought about me, and really strengthening my identity and also really challenging me to step out in faith in different ways, and to really trust that he can do what he says that he can do. And I think that really was the turning point for me for sure, is that horrible situation was then turned to that.
It is interesting how the Lord often uses some of the most difficult scenarios in life to bring us to a better place spiritually. So certainly that wasn't a good experience, being bullied and so forth, but yet the Lord worked in that to draw you closer to him. And I like what you described about journaling, because I've often said to people who are like, well, how do I hear the voice of the Lord? I'll say, just sit down and write what you believe the Lord is saying to you. And it will be amazing sometimes. And so you walk through that kind of experience, begin to develop an understanding of the Holy Spirit speaking to you.
And I will say it was definitely a big learning process for me. I think a big thing that is, I would always try to ask, give me confirmation this is really you speaking to me, which he would confirm in different ways. But I think there was a lot of times where I still got it wrong. But God really showed me the picture of when someone's teaching, a parent's teaching their child how to walk. When their child, they're going to fall over. It's part of learning how to walk. But even when their child does fall over, what does the parent do? They don't sit back there and be like, oh my gosh, you just fell over. I'm grounding you for 2 weeks because you just fell over while you were trying to learn to walk. Go figure it out. That's not what a parent does at all. A good parent is going to be like, wow, I'm so proud of you. You just took some steps. Let's get back up and let's do it again. And I'm going to be there to catch you when you do fall. And I really felt like that's what God was for me, and still is, because let's be real, I think I will always still just be learning how to walk when it comes to hearing the voice of God. I'm not going to get it right 100% of the time, but God really felt like God celebrated the fact that I was trying. Even when I did fall down and did get it wrong, God was still celebrating the fact, I'm so proud of you for stepping out in faith and trying to hear my voice, even though you got it wrong. Thank you so much for trying. Now let's try to here's how we can do it more correctly. So I think that was a big thing of that season, is that my personal relationship with God really gave me a safe place to mess up and fail. And I think that's a really healthy spot for every Christian to have when you're growing in these things, especially the gifts of the Spirit, is having a safe place to mess up.
Now, when you were a teenager, did you go on mission trips even in those years? What
Yes.
was your first mission trip?
So my first mission trip was about a year or two before we adopted. I think I was like around 10 or 11. My parents had been to Cambodia the year prior. So Sophia Syme has come here and we now support him. But my parents at one point lived in Oregon. And while they were there, they had the small group that they got really plugged into. And that small group reached back out to them because they were still connected and said, hey, do you want to go to Cambodia with us? So my mom and dad went to Cambodia in like 2006, I think, and or 2007, and my parents just fell in love with it there. And then I think when Sophia was on furlough in America raising support, they had him come and stay at our house in Tennessee, and so then we ended up ended up taking all of us to Cambodia for like 10 days or 2 weeks in like 2008. So we got really connected to them. Every time they came to America, they would come, and we really just became family with them. So me and my sister, I will say this proves how ridiculously crazy my parents are at trusting God, is me and my sister went by ourselves when I was 14 and she was 16. We flew halfway around the world by ourselves. And now at that point, I had been to Cambodia, and then I had also been to Ethiopia to help pick up my siblings. And my sister Danielle, who was 16, she had already been to Cambodia once as well. So I had some international traveling experience, but I don't think it was until we were flying back home that I was like, wow, this is crazy that our parents let us do this. But yeah, so we were there for 6 weeks. When I was 14, I actually turned 15 there, which that was a really, really great time. I think it was a great relief for me because that was still the season where I was being bullied. So it was really great to be removed from America and removed from people who were bullying me. But I don't think I really grew that much because I was still kind of under the shadow of my sister, of just letting her, kind of take the lead as younger sisters do. But then when I was 16, I went back to Cambodia for the entire summer by myself. And that, I feel like, is when I really grew up, is that summer, because I was there alone with no one else in my family. Both times we went, me and my sister, and when I went by myself, we were living with the pastor's family. So as soon as we got on the ground, we were good. So my parents were crazy, but we did have people right at the other end. But then when I went for the 3 months by myself, I had no family there. It was just me and my Cambodian parents, Ginny and Sophia. They really just treated me like an adult, and they gave me a lot of responsibility. I helped homeschool their kids, but then also I was teaching dance classes at the church. I was teaching English classes, which is a big outreach for that church. And then I also was teaching a Bible study, and I'm pretty sure everyone in the Bible study was older than me. But that was the first time I had to really, I guess, take responsibility and be an adult. And I'm a rose bush for those of you who know the tree types. But at that point in my life, I hadn't really been a rose bush. I was definitely just a jerk rose bush that was really competitive, honestly. Lots and lots of thorns. But I feel like that was the season where I was like, oh, I do have leadership abilities. And I feel like I can actually gel in a leadership role. And I just really felt like I was given a lot of responsibility and really flourished under the weight of that. That was really, really a fundamental time. And then when I graduated from high school, I had prayed leading up to graduation and just really felt like God had told me not to go to college, which that can be a whole other conversation in itself. But instead, I knew someone who ministered or worked in the Middle East, and it is illegal to be a missionary in the Middle East where we were at. So they worked in the Middle East and invited me to go volunteer at the organization they were at for a semester, which I ended up doing, which was also an amazing, amazing experience.
So in that season, you were growing closer to Christ. Did you come to a much more keen awareness of the Holy Spirit guiding you and being with you day in and day out?
Yes, for sure. There was lots of time leading up to going to Cambodia for the 3 months by myself, and just lots of different ways where I just felt like God would speak to me and give me different insight, but it also challenged me to step out in faith in different ways. And that really, really grew me. I think in Cambodia, it grew a lot in a more practical sense of I was leading the Bible study, and we weren't using some curriculum. I was just making it up or like putting it together, and I would try to be good and prepare in advance, days in advance, and I would get nothing. And like every single time, God would not speak to me about the Bible study until the day of. So like having to like grow in the trust of that. Or also while I was there in Cambodia, there was a group from Australia that they were people gifted in like the gift of supernatural healing. And I think in that season, I really started to see the power of God in that, and was able to start walking in that and seeing God do amazing things in that. So I became a lot more aware of what God could do, and also just in relationship with God became a lot more aware of what God wanted to do, and just seeing his heart for people and his heart for the world.
Now, as you left the teen years and began to develop as a young woman, were there some what I would call dry seasons or wilderness seasons where you just sort of really wondered what was going on in your life?
Yeah. So after I decided not to go to college. And I will say that was a decision, like I was obeying God in that, but there's so many people who would question me and like kind of mock me for choosing not to go to college. I think it's a little different now. This was like 10 years ago, but if there's someone in your life who feels like they're not supposed to go to college, like I would highly recommend you encourage them if they feel like they're following God, because it was really difficult to have people just sit there and be like, what do you mean? What are you going to do with your life? You're not going to be able to make an income if you don't go to college. But anyway, so felt like wasn't supposed to go to college. Ended up going to the Middle East for a semester after graduating from high school. And when I came home, I felt like what God told me to do was nothing. I feel like he told me to not get a job, obviously not do any schooling or anything. And I did not like that. I did it. I obeyed. I was probably more of a grumpy obeyer in that season. And it ended up being about 3-ish years of that. I think at one point he finally did allow me to start helping out, like serving in the nursery on Wednesday nights, of being like over the nursery, I guess, just coordinating it, which is a role I still have. And I think at some point I started to get to teach dance, but it was a couple years of not having a job. And but I look back at that season of my life and realized it was the most foundational season of my life. In that season of my life, I would spend hours every day in worship. Worship really, really radically shaped who I am in that season. And I guess there was a lot of trauma I had just acquired from my childhood and being bullied, and just I believed so many different lies about myself, so many lies, and I hated myself, honestly. So God really spent those 3 years of just taking me through some really, really deep healing. And I got to read through the Bible multiple times through that season, memorized a ton of scripture, which sadly I've forgotten most of by now, but there was a ton of healing that went on in that season. And even like within that season, I'm the type of person, I'm very much a go-getter. I like doing stuff, feeling like I have purpose, getting stuff done. So being in a season where my identity couldn't be in what I was doing was really, really difficult. And I remember complaining to God, being like, God, I could be anywhere in the world right now. I could be in Africa. You could be using me in Africa right now, sleeping on the dirt floor of a hut, and I'd be totally fine, but you're having me here. Like, I didn't get, like, I felt like I was doing nothing. And I clearly heard him say, when you said that you would do anything for me, did it include this? And I think that really broke me, because it's like, okay, I had told God, like, God, I'll do anything for you. But I guess in my mind, when I said I wanted to do anything for God, I wanted it to be anything that I thought was cool. When he asked the thing that cost me the most of doing nothing, that really, really, really challenged me. But it was not a fun season. Looking back, like while I was in it, it was a not fun season. But looking back, I realized everything God is going to build off of my life in the future is going to come out of that season of just the radical healing he brought me through. He grew me in so many different ways. So that was definitely not a fun season, but I'm glad it's over.
Let me ask you, in that time period, what lies did you believe about yourself?
Oh.
And the reason I ask you that question is I think a lot of young people, and particularly young women, have certain lies that they will believe in that season of life. What do you think you believe?
Oh, tons. I think I definitely, the bullying I did go through definitely showed me a lot of, instilled a lot of lies in me. So I really felt like, just even from a physical sense, I hated my appearance and felt that I was really ugly. I did think I was worthless. I was the type of, I guess I also had a very false sense of humility where I felt that being humble meant that I had to hate myself, and thought that humility was, if I can just be invisible and no one see me, and they just see God and that I don't exist, that is great, and that's the goal of humility, which I think that was actually just a sense of pride, because I was still the center of the subject and hating myself and thinking of trying to be humble, and that way of just putting myself down. I was still the center of the conversation, so that's still a form of pride. But yeah, I just really, I hated myself, and I guess, those were the main lies that I believed. I think I also believed that, I think there was also some beliefs as a woman that I couldn't be used by God and that I had to be silent or stuff like that. So I think God broke off a lot of lies that, he can use me even though I am a female, and that he wants to use me. And I think just a lot of it is I had to learn that anything that I believe about myself that God doesn't see in me is a lie. So if I believe that I'm a horrible person, but God doesn't think I'm a horrible person, one of us is wrong, and I can promise you God's not the one that's wrong. So
I like what you said about humility. You described it as a false humility in sort of being self-condemning or even self-depriving. And that's I do think there are people who see humility in that way. But real humility might be recognizing the gifts that you have, but using them to serve, not for your personal gain or personal acclamation, but to the glory of God.
Mm-hmm. I will say another lie that I think I really did believe was concerning my voice. When I was a teenager, I really felt like God was calling me, and just felt like a calling and a purpose was singing. And the issue is I couldn't sing very well. And I think that was partially due to, I had a lot of people tell me a lot of things about my voice. They're like, oh, you can sing, but just never a voice would be soloed out. Or there was someone running monitors once back in the day when we had monitors, because I was in the choir, and they're like, I soloed out your mic, and sheesh, just telling me things about my voice. So I had a lot of lies built up around my voice as well. And there was, I was streaming some conference online, and someone was sharing a story of how they were a nurse, and there was someone who was mentally ill, and this woman that was mentally ill believed that they were pregnant. 100% not pregnant. Every test in the world could prove they're not pregnant. But this person believed the lie so much that their body started reacting as if they were pregnant, and started showing symptoms of pregnancy, even though 100% not pregnant. And this person was just trying to expose the power of lies, that when we believe lies, it can have physical effects when we believe a lie. So I just remember being like, God, I think you've called me to do stuff with singing. I'm not tone deaf, but my voice just doesn't really sound good. And I just started praying and asking God to break off the lies, and just declaring the truth of what God had told me about my voice over myself. And I had recordings of my voice prior to that moment singing. And then it was a couple months later, I realized, I was listening back, trying to listen to some song I'd wrote or something. And then I compared it to what my voice sounded like in that moment. And I also had other people coming up to me being like, hey, I think your your voice sounds just totally different. It's like you have a new voice. And I listened back at recordings and realized from that day on, my voice sounded totally different than what it did, because I think there just was something physically, the lies were just having a physical effect on me. So I think that was also a big lie that God broke off in that season.
I think for many young people in the teen years, early 20s, it would be rare that people are highly aware of spiritual warfare. But the spiritual warfare is real. And I think the spirits of evil will try to plant lies in you against the very things that God has created for you to do. In other words, let's say you have a sense you're called to be a writer, but you start believing lies that I'm no good at this or something of that nature. And part of that is spiritual warfare. And this is why I asked you the question about what lies did you believe. Lies are the primary place where the spirits of evil get inroads in our lives and sometimes get us way off course. Some people have believed lies in the culture today to go down paths of immorality that are just self-destructive, but it started with lies. But you began to believe truth, that somehow the lies started to be vanquished. You started to understand God saw you differently, that he had good things in store for you. How did you begin to progress in walking in truth?
Yeah, so there was lots of, I think worship was the big thing for me. That's the main place God encountered me, is in worship of just, I think my clarity of my view of myself became a lot more clear when I could more clearly see who God was. And I think we're all made to worship, and I feel like it's just, that radically changed my life is that. And I think the scripture reading also really helped as well, of just memorizing scripture, and but worship was the big thing.
Now, those of us who do know you would say, well, you're very gifted as a worship leader. You obviously lead worship here at the church from time to time. You're a gifted dancer and very coordinated. We enjoy seeing you dance. But in some ways, you believe the lies, but now God has transformed those to use those as gifts, not for your glory, but for the good of others and for his glory. It's really a beautiful thing to see you flourish and grow in your gifts and talents. Have there been any people who've been mentors to you along the way?
Your wife, for sure. Yeah, I would say, honestly, Michelle has been huge. I started working with her in worship arts, 2018, 2019 is when I was asked to join the leadership team. I think that's been really huge for me. Prior to that, I'm totally for mentorship and having people in your life. But I will say, in the season where I didn't work and didn't have any job, I didn't really have anyone in my life whatsoever mentoring me. But I think for me in that season, it was healthy in the fact that I depended upon God for everything. I think, like I said, I don't want to encourage people like, oh, you don't need mentors. God can just teach you himself. Having mentorship is really huge and really, really healthy. I just think in the season that I was in, for whatever reason, God had me a season of being concealed, and having him be the only one to pour into me that season.
I know some people sort of have a formal mentor relationship with somebody, and they meet regularly, things like that. Personally, I've never been able to find that effective. For me, what's effective is developing a relationship with someone and then learning from their model. And you were saying that's what was occurring in working in worship arts and things of that nature. And I do think it's very valuable for all of us to have a model, somebody we look to that we can learn from. The difficult thing as you get older is there are less models ahead of you. They're more behind you. But that's part of the journey, too. And I really think as we get older that we're called to be more of a model to people who are younger than us. Now, in the last few years, you've had some major life changes which overlapped. A young gentleman came into your life. Let's start talking about this idea of developing a relationship that ended in marriage.
Yeah, so I think Ben and I are both unique in the fact that neither of us ever dated anyone else. We were each other's first date, first everything, which is huge and beautiful. But I was 27 at the time that happened. So there was definitely a large chunk of my adulthood where I was single, very, very single. And that was really hard for me. But God did a lot of good in that, and I learned so much about that, and God really taught me that if it was God's will for me to be single in that season, that is the absolute best thing that God could give me in that season, and that my life is just as good from the side of God in that season of singleness as it would be someday when I was married. That God's not looking at like, someday her life will be good when she's married. That's just a view that I would have of myself. So God really grew me in that. I really believed I was supposed to be single in that season, and so that my life is just as good now as it will be someday if God does allow me to get married. I was single until I guess Ben and I met when we were, I was 26 or 20, I guess I was 25. It's actually crazy because it almost didn't happen. So it was, I work at a church, and one of my roles at a church is helping with the big Christmas service. So December is a big, huge, crazy work month for me, one of the busiest. But during that December, a tornado had hit Kentucky, at Mayfield, Kentucky, and just totally destroyed it. And I had just come off doing a missions trip to Louisiana doing disaster recovery from a hurricane down there. So I was like, man, it'd be great to take a missions team and go to Kentucky since we're so close. So I'd had the thought in the back of my head, but Christmas came, all the Christmas stuff started happening, and I was absolutely exhausted. So it got to I was December 26th, and I was like, I'm not doing this missions trip. It's we would have to leave in a week and a half. I've done nothing for it whatsoever. It was just, I'm exhausted. I need some rest. But I'm a good Christian girl. So I decided I was going to sit down and pray so God could tell me that I was right and that I didn't need to go on this missions trip, So sat down, prayed, and God told me to go. And I was not very happy with that. So I gave God the ultimatum that, okay, I'm going to knock on one more door. If the door opens, I'll go. So get on Facebook, find a church that's posting about doing stuff, send them a message or call them or something, and within 30 minutes, I'm on the phone with them. They say, we'd absolutely love for you to come. In fact, you can stay at our church. We have beds set up, and we'll cover all your meals. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess this is happening. So I put out there on Facebook that we're going on this missions trip in 8 days. And one of the people who decided to come on the missions trip was Ben. And his mom used to do a homeschool group that was here at the church. And so she was part of the church's Facebook group, had seen the thing. And Ben, a couple months prior, had felt like God had told him to go on a missions trip, that God wanted him to go. And so he thought Africa would be where he would end up going. But then Kentucky came around and was like, well, that's not Africa, but I have no reason not to go. So that's how we met. But that trip it really did not almost happen. There was other obstacles that came up that almost stopped it from happening. It was a crazy trip within itself with people getting COVID and having to quarantine and getting kicked out of where we were staying because of it and getting a last-minute Airbnb and everything. But what's crazy is 2 marriages ended up coming out of that trip. So Ben and I ended up getting married, and then some other friends that reconnected on that trip ended up getting married. So that was crazy, but at the time, definitely did notice Ben, but really felt like God said no, that was not it. No. So we still became friends. We ended up going to South Africa together on a mission trip, becoming closer friends in a friend group, and then we went to Kenya together, but just still felt like God was saying no to that. And honestly did not like that God was saying no to that. But I think God really used that season. So we were friends for a year and a half from us meeting to when we officially did actually start dating. But I feel like God, first of all, I think there were some areas that Ben needed to grow in. He really, really like grew a ton spiritually. And that time it was really cool to see all the stuff God did on that, like through the mission trips, because God really did use mission trips in his life. So it was really beautiful to see God do that. But I think also for me, I had a lot of betrayal in friendships growing up and even outside of the bullying, because it wasn't friends that bullied me, it was people that bullied me. But I had like 13 different friends in elementary and school that backstabbed me in some way. So I was really, really damaged. And I had gone years without really having any friends. Like after my high school best friend had moved away, like I didn't really have any friends for like 4, 5, 6 years. That was really difficult. And there had been some friendships I had and kind of just like, it was too much emotionally for me to handle because of all my scars. So I'd pull away from friendships and stuff. So I think the friendship I did end up having with Ben prior to being in a relationship, it was so healing for me. I needed that. And I don't think if we had ever just started dating, I don't think I would have been healed in the way that I was, because it wasn't a friend. It would have been a relationship. But to have a friend that didn't betray me, didn't reject me, didn't backstab me, didn't bully me, or all that sort of stuff, it was really, really healing. But then it did get to the point, there was some stuff where I felt like God had told me to do some things, and it didn't pan out the way that I felt God had said. So I really got to a point of like, okay, is there other stuff in my life where I've misheard God or just didn't hear him correctly or something? And one of the main areas I went to God about was like, hey, this guy, if you hadn't have told me no, I would marry him tomorrow if he asked me. Like, because I'd seen his character. I had seen different areas in his life where God had called him out on stuff, and he listened to the Holy Spirit and like repented and changed his ways. I had seen him walk through hard stuff. Like, I'd just seen a ton of godly principles in him and had great friendship with him, loved being around him. I'm like, God, if you hadn't have told me no, I'd marry this dude tomorrow. So kept praying, and like just there's different stuff that came up. I was like, okay, I think maybe there is actually supposed to be something here. And then God really started just like, I guess, pushing me in that direction. So, but a year prior, I had friend zoned him because it came obvious that he had feelings for me. So I was like, hey, just, we can only be friends. I feel like God's told me no to this. Most people probably would have just stopped being friends with me at that point, but he didn't, which is why we're here today. So I ended up going back to him and being like, hey, so actually, I would like you to pray about getting married. Like, I just straight up said that
But you said that to him?
I did.
Oh.
I went to him and I was like, I've been praying about whether or not I heard God correctly concerning you, and I think maybe it wasn't as much of a no as I thought it was. And I am really interested. I really admire you. All these characteristics about you, I really admire. And I think we're really good friends. I think we know each other well enough to, be able to know now without going through just the dating process to see whether or not, like, you would be interested in, like, ending up together forever. Like, I was in a point where, like, I was 27 at the time. I hadn't been in a relationship and didn't want to go through just the whole dating game of, like, let's play around to see if this is something. Like, we knew each other really, really well. That's what I went and told him. And surprisingly, it only took him 3 to 4 weeks to come back and be like, let's try this thing. So, I ended up going with his family. They were going to Europe for his family's Finnish, and his grandmother's 100% Finnish. So they had this trip planned. I ended up going on the trip with them. So I consider that our first real date was in London, is what I consider. But it was really beautiful to see how God did orchestrate all that and speak to him and speak to me through all that. So we ended up dating for, I guess, 6 months to the day after we became official, is when he proposed, and we were engaged for 2.5 months before we got married.
Now, during this time when you were trying to sort things out, there were a number of us who observed this relationship and approved and thought things were should go in a better direction. But then when I heard that you went with his family to Europe, I thought, well, it must be a done deal at this point.
Yeah.
So that was pretty
Yeah,
good.
I think that was part of him being so he wasn't as 100% sold as I was at the beginning. He's I think within 4 weeks of us starting to date, he was okay, yeah, I'm good. But I think part of Europe was okay, let's see how she does around my family. Because if she doesn't do well around my family, she's out. Because we were close friends, but I didn't spend a ton of time with his family. And I ended up being sharing rooms with his grandmother the whole trip. And just spending a lot of time, obviously, with them. We were there for 2 weeks. So, yeah.
So you had this wonderful thing going on, but overlapping with that, you had a very difficult thing going on with your father. And so backtrack a little bit and tell us what happened with your father's journey.
Yeah. So I guess I was around 22 or so when my mom started noticing my dad having some memory issues, or just getting confused about stuff, and also his speech. He was starting to stutter and slur, and that was just not him at all. So finally, she decided to talk to him about it, and they ended up going to the doctor. And at that point, he was given the probable diagnosis of having early-onset Alzheimer's. He was around 52 when he started showing symptoms, and I think he was around 54 when we first got that initial diagnosis. After a couple months, the diagnosis did get incorrectly shifted to an autoimmune disease in the brain, is what they said. They thought it might be because they tried some different stuff just to really rule out that it wasn't early, to rule out that it was early onset Alzheimer's, but there's some stuff that kind of worked. So they're okay, we think actually it might be this thing. So the diagnosis still did kind of change. But after a few years of him, it did get a little bit better on some of the blood infusion stuff, IVIG, that they had him on. It did kind of stall, and it didn't get too bad for a little bit, but then we started noticing the symptoms continue to change and pick up, and finally ended up going to the Mayo Clinic in Florida, where he got a spinal tap, where he got the clear-cut official diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's, which is extremely rare. To get Alzheimer's after the age of 65 is, I think, about 1 in 10 people get Alzheimer's after the age of 65. To get it before the age of 65 is 0.02% chance or something like that of getting early onset Alzheimer's. So it's extremely, extremely rare to get that. So he started showing symptoms at 52. It was around 53 or 54 we first went to the doctor. So he struggled with that for a long time. He had a big symptom for him was his speech, is he was losing his ability to just remember words, to form words, and just to communicate clearly, which is not something a lot of people experience with Alzheimer's. Usually they forget just what's going on, what they're doing, where stuff is, and stuff like that, but they can still clearly communicate. So it was something rare for him. But at the first original diagnosis, right at the beginning, we were told that maybe 5 years from now he would mentally be gone, but his body could live on for another 10, 20 years because of how young he is. That's how long his body could live. Obviously, that we did have a different outlook for a little bit, for a couple-year chunk before we did go back to the original early onset Alzheimer's diagnosis. But it is one of the worst diseases ever. Because my dad did end up dying a year ago, physically, but mentally, he died way before that. And it's just having to watch a parent that is young, in their 50s, lose their mind is horrible. It's a horrible, horrible thing. And to watch him have to grieve his own death was horrible. And watching my mom have to walk through the whole season of, becoming a caregiver, and, having to quit all the jobs and do everything just to become full-time caregiver for him. So when I met Ben, I think that was one of the big reasons, I was in the spot of going to him and being like, hey, do you want to get married? Instead of being like, let's play this whole dating game. Is I think one major, benefit that I've had from my dad's illness is just realizing how stinking short life is and how we're not guaranteed anything. I'm not guaranteed to live until I'm 60. I'm not guaranteed to live till I'm 80. I'm not guaranteed to live till I'm 30. Life is just so short, and I don't want to live as if I'm going to live forever. So if there's dreams and stuff, do it now. Don't wait till, I love traveling, but I'm not going to wait until I retire and have time to travel in order to travel. I want to do stuff now, and just on the spiritual side of that as well. I'm not going to wait until XYZ happens in order to get my act right with God. I want to have a relationship with him now, because, we're not guaranteed anything. But that definitely was one encouragement for me of not wanting to wait, is because I'm I'm not guaranteed. I would love to just get married and spend the rest of my life with you. I don't want to waste time. But so at the time that we started in a relationship, my dad was functional, and I think an amazing thing about my dad is when he did get diagnosed, he started reading all these books about Alzheimer's and whatnot. And it's a very hopeless disease, and all the books were just saying that it was. And hey, pretty much you're just going to die. Just go ahead and give up on life is what he felt like the message was. But he just really felt like he didn't just want to surrender and give up, that he wanted to outrun Alzheimer's. And he wanted to be as healthy as he could be physically so he could live the longest that he could. So he started training for and competing in half Ironman, which is crazy. But even in that, the first one he competed in, he got confused on the course. He thought he completed the swim part and was doing the biking part. No, he had completed the swim and the bike. And he thought you're supposed to do 2 loops in order to get the complete distance. And he thought he got confused with the directions, and ended up getting disqualified because even that So we ended up finding people who could run the races with him, or it's kind of illegal to help people do with directions and stuff during these, but there were some people who kind of helped a couple times to help kind of direct him. But we did find someone who was a lot better at Ironman than him, and he would start training with my dad, and Skylar's his name. Absolute mad respect for this guy who he started doing the races with my dad and just sticking with him and directing him the whole way. So it was it's actually the day we left for Europe, that Ben and I left for Europe. My dad competed in his last half Ironman and completed it. It was a year later that he died. But so he was still physically really healthy and strong, and mentally he was confused a lot. Couldn't talk well was the big thing, is he couldn't talk, and there's a lot of lack of understanding. So that was one really hard thing for me, is that Ben never got to really meet my dad. I'm so grateful, though, that he did get to meet what was left at that point. And my dad loved Ben, and I was really grateful he was able to remember Ben's name for about a year, and that he was also able to remember that Ben did photography. So that was a real gift that he was able to remember that. But he didn't get to remember. Ben didn't really get to know him. But about in the January, so Ben and I started dating in September, and that January, about 2 months before we got engaged, or 3 months before we got engaged, my dad really started to decline. And it was just, January was a horrible month, and he declined a ton during that month. And then he kind of stabled, and then Ben and I got engaged and married. And so my dad was able to physically be there. I ended up it was more me walking him down the aisle. And with the help of my mom, he was able to say, who gives, when you said you were there, who gives this woman away to be married? He was able to say, I do. Or we did simplify it from her mother and I to I do, or we do, so that he could say it. But, there wasn't able to be a first dance or anything. But I was so grateful he was able to be there. And I think for the most part, he was aware what was going on. But about 2 weeks after our wedding, he started majorly declining. So we get back from the honeymoon, and it's earlier, very much newlyweds. And it turns out that I have to become one of the full-time caregivers for my dad. So he ended up being put on hospice in a month after we got back, a month after our wedding. And at the time we were told, hey, because of how long he's been sick, that's why he's eligible for hospice. We don't think he'll die within the next 6 months, which is usually a requirement for hospice. But it's just, we think hospice would be helpful in the situation. But he majorly just started declining to the point where he was, for his benefit, he was confined to my parents' room and their bathroom, and they have a big bonus room off their bathroom. But he would, if he tried to go out, he would get so confused and scared and would just go back in and could barely talk or sleep and was just utterly confused. And but I had the gift of being able to work remotely. I'd finally just gotten approved to get a laptop that would be strong enough to be able to do my job with tons of video editing. I needed a stronger laptop. And I thought, when I requested for the laptop, I was like, I just want to work not at the church building all the time. I want to work in coffee shops. And then after I got the laptop, 2 days later is when he majorly declined. So I was able to take the laptop that was meant for coffee shops, but it wasn't actually. It was meant for my dad. So I had the absolute privilege of being able to spend 4 days a week with him for the last about 3 months of his life. And he ended up dying on November 30th of last year, which was the day my family was supposed to celebrate Thanksgiving. So the last week of his life was the week of Thanksgiving. But there's a ton of grace in it, and it was beautiful to see. My brother, actually, who had been running really hard from God for 10 years, by my dad's deathbed, about a month before he passed, he accepted Christ again and radically turned his life back to Christ. And so I was very grateful that God used that situation, and all the people coming and helping my family in that season was a major thing that led my brother back to Christ. So I was very grateful for that. But yeah, my dad died at 60, and it was 1 day short of my 6-month wedding anniversary. But I was really, really grateful for Ben through all of that I got to go through that with a husband and not just a boyfriend or a fiance. It would have been horrible to go through my dad's death and not live with Ben. I really did need someone in that time. So I was very grateful for that. And I would have expected that to be a lot more challenging on our marriage than it was. But I think that's really because of Ben and how amazing he was in that season and the grace he gave me to be able to help my dad and to be able to grieve how I needed to.
Yeah, of course, I knew your dad fairly well. He used to work here at the church running sound.
Yep.
That wasn't his primary job, but he came and did that and did it for years and appreciated his ministry in that regard. I must say, when I found out he'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I found it so ironic because I considered your dad a very intelligent man and a very articulate man.
He was.
And it was difficult, of course, especially for your family, but for everybody to see him decline. But as you mentioned, I had the honor and privilege of officiating your wedding and was thankful that the Lord allowed for your father to give you away that day. And I remember talking with your father that day. And he was very cognizant, very aware. It was like the Lord gave him a special gift just for your wedding. And none of us can understand why God allows things like that, why he allows the hardship. It was so difficult for your mom, and I'm sure it's still difficult for your mom. But yet the Lord has brought good things out of it and is still doing good things, I believe. And it's sort of this ironic contrast of life that at the time you're having this great experience of this beautiful wedding and with this wonderful young man that your dad is there and you know his time is limited. And here we are a year later that he's passed. Mm-hmm. What would you say in the last year, maybe as we start to wrap up here, would be the things that are most important for you in terms of your walk with Christ and how you go about living life?
Mm-hmm. I will say that I expected to be grieving a lot more than I am, than I have, I guess. I grieved a whole lot for the years leading up. I mean, there was many years of grief leading up to my dad's death, and the months following, there was very few days of grief, actually. I think there's a lot of just relief that he wasn't suffering anymore. It was absolutely horrible to have to watch him go through what he did go through. But I did expect there to be a lot more grief this year. I think there's definitely been a lot of hard days, and the last month have been honestly some of the hardest. We just passed his birthday in October, and then the week later we were finally able to spread his ashes. And I felt like God's really allowed me to experience some grief that I've needed to experience, and I'm sure this upcoming week will be the same as we come up on the 1-year anniversary of his death and passing. This podcast might be out after that, but yeah, so I think spiritually this last year, I think there's been a lot of spiritual benefit from what did go on with my dad. You're talking about the tension between getting married and having, like, last year was one of the best years of my life, and it's also one of the worst years of my life. But I think one of the reasons why it was so good is because of how bad it was. I've written a song about it, which some people have heard. I haven't ever released it, but I've sang it publicly a couple times, called "Beautiful Tension." And the whole idea of the song is that you can't really experience true joy unless you've experienced deep pain. Like, to the level you've experienced pain is the level you can experience joy. So I think that has been something that's really been beneficial to me, is I'm so much more grateful now for everything in life. But I think this last year has been a lot of just resting and recouping and just not having a dying father anymore has been really beneficial and helpful. I think for me spiritually, I've been in a space of, I feel like in the past I've had stronger faith than I have now. And I used to hear the voice of God more than I do now. There's different spiritual giftings I feel like God has allowed me to walk in that I'm not walking in as much now as I should be. So I think I've been in a place of just, I'm really busy, and I feel like busyness has gotten in the way a lot. So I'm really in a place of trying to get back to sitting with the Lord and listening and journaling again and walking in the spiritual giftings I feel like that He has given me. I think another area of my life is I full on have a social media addiction, which it's hard to, my job is social media. At the church, I do social media, so I think I started putting barriers in place in June of not doing social media personally. I still do my job, don't worry, I still do my job, but there's this device called a brick. It's like $59, so it's a little pricey, but it has changed my life in a lot of great ways. It's a physical device that it's like a magnet you can put on your fridge, or you can take it around with you or put it wherever. But where it physically locks your phone, like how you tap to pay, you can tap this device and it will lock the apps that you've told it to lock, to where it's impossible for you to get onto Instagram or Facebook from your phone. So that's been something that's helped me spiritually, honestly, is I've just realized scrolling was just a numbing mechanism for me. If I would be like, oh, something that made me uncomfortable, let's get my phone out and scroll and numb myself. So that's been something that I've been trying to really break and get a hold of, is I don't want things in my life that are a barrier between me and God. So that's been something I've been trying to work through and cut off, because I don't want that in my life. But I think the big thing spiritually is I've just realized I'm not satisfied with where I'm at, and I want to be deeper, and I want to grow deeper with God. And I want to be really intentional about doing that. So I'm trying to get back into that.
Well, Hannah, first of all, let me say that it's been an honor to know you now for many years. Of course, when you were a little girl, I didn't really know you very well, but to get to know you better over the years. I'm thankful that you don't believe the lies anymore because you are a very gifted and talented young lady, and we are honored to have you as a part of the church staff. It is a joy when you lead worship or when you dance or something like that, how it helps others in their worship experience. And I know my wife appreciates you very much in your ministry within worship arts. And with regard to these podcasts, well, you do a wonderful job interviewing people, and it's been an honor to reverse the roles.
I know you might be. Are you coming after my job now? You're seeming to have fun.
Well, I am having a lot of fun today, but you're doing a great job with it. We're thankful for it. I think the podcast you've done help a lot of people see into others' lives and realize they have struggles like I have, and God works in their lives, and maybe He'll work in the same way for me. So thank you for sharing today and being vulnerable. And I do pray the Lord will continue to heal where you are grieving about the passing of your father. As you age, you'll look back and things will change, but there'll always be a tender spot there. I lost my father well over 25 years ago. And so I pray He brings healing to you and to your mom. I pray also He brings new and special blessings to you and to your husband. And thank you for sharing today.
Thank you.